In this video, we are going to go over how to solve by completing the square. We actually already know how to complete the square because we used it already to convert our equations from standard form to vertex form. So let's review that really quick. So if I were to convert this 1a problem from standard form to vertex form, my first step would be to move my c value over. Then to fill my blank, when we're completing the square, we're going to use that opposite of b divided by 2 squared. So half of b is -3 squared would be a +9. I'm going to add that to both sides. On the left side, this would combine to be y plus 2. On the right side, this is going to factor into x minus 3, which is going to be x minus 3 quantity squared. Then the final step to convert to vertex form is to move that value with the y back over, so I minus the 2. And so this is what my equation would look like in vertex form. Let's do one more example of this, but now in 2a, I have an a value. So the first step is still going to be the same. I'm still going to move my c value over. But now before I fill this blank, I have to factor out my a value of -2. So you only fill the blank after you factor out the a value. So now I'm going to do half of b squared, so half of a squared is -4, which would be -4 squared would be 16. But what goes in the blank on the other side is 16 times -2, which will be -32. So on the left side, I'll have y minus 6. On the right side, I'll have -2 times x minus 4 times x minus 4, because that's how that factors, or -2 times x minus 4 squared. Then that final step is to move the 6 over. So my final factored form will be -2 times the quantity x minus 4 squared plus 6. Now, when we're solving, the only difference will be that instead of y, I'll have a 0 in the place of y. So what we're going to do is we're going to take these now converted forms, and I'm going to plug in 0 for y and solve. So I'm going to have 0 equals x minus 3 squared minus 2. And this should look really familiar because it should look like the problems we did with solving by square root property. So the first thing I'm going to do is add 2. So I'll get 2 equals x minus 3 squared. Then to get rid of that squared, I'm going to square root both sides. 2 is not a perfect square, so I'm going to leave it as plus or minus the square root of 2, and then I'll just have x minus 3 on this side. And my final step will be to add 3. So I have 3 plus or minus the square root of 2 equals x. If you wrote it as plus or minus the square root of 2 plus 3, that would be fine too. Let's do the same thing for 2b. I'm going to take this equation that I got, put 0 in for y, and then solve using my square root property. So first I'm going to minus my 6. Then I'm going to divide by this -2 in front. I cannot distribute it in because of this squared, so keep that in mind. We cannot distribute it in. That's why I'm dividing. So I'm going to get +3 equals x minus 4 quantity squared. To get rid of that squared, I am going to square root both sides. And again, 3 is not a perfect square, so I'm going to have plus or minus the square root of 3 equals x minus 4. So to finish solving this, I'm going to add 4, and I'll get 4 plus or minus the square root of 3 equals x. All right, so let's put this all together now, and let's try one from the very beginning. So if I have a problem like this in example 3, they've actually already moved the c value over for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set it up as if I were going to complete the square to turn it to vertex form. So I'm just going to add my blanks in, because I want to make this side a perfect square trinomial. So to do that, I'm going to do half of b squared, which would be half of 4 squared, which would be 4. So I'm going to add that to both sides. Then I'm going to factor this left side. So what multiplies to 4 and adds to 4 would be x plus 2, which would be the same as x plus 2 quantity squared. And on this side, I'm going to have 7. Now, instead of moving that 7 over, I'm just going to continue solving because my goal is to get the x alone. So to get rid of this squared, I'm going to square root both sides. Then I'm going to get plus or minus the square root of 7 minus the 2, and I'm going to get x equals -2 plus or minus the square root of 7. So same process, just especially when we get to this step or this step, we're not going to move that 7 back over. We're just going to continue trying to get the x alone. Let's do one more example, but now we have an a value. So again, I still always want to move my c value over, so I still have a c value here, so I'm going to move it to the other side. Because my goal is that I need to make this side a perfect square trinomial. But since I have an a value, I need to factor that out before I can complete the square. So just like before, I'm going to do half of b squared, which is going to give me 4 again. But since I have this 2 on the outside, I have to do 2 times 4, so I have to add 8 to the other side to keep the equation balanced. So now I want to factor this x squared plus 4x plus 4, and it'll factor into x plus 2x plus 2, or x plus 2 quantity squared with that 2 in front. To finish solving, I'll divide by that 2 in front. To get rid of the squared, I'll square root both sides. Again, always plus or minus the square root because you always get 2 solutions. And my last step will be to -2. So it'll be -2 plus or minus the square root of 6.